Hello, welcome to the Self-Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Chapter 6, Globalization and Social Change. And our topic is, are global interconnections new to world and to India? If globalization is about global interconnections, we can ask whether this is really a new phenomenon. Was India or the different parts of the world not interacting with each other in earlier times? Now let us discuss the earlier years. India was not isolated from the world even 2000 years ago. We have read in our history textbooks about the famous Silk Route, which centuries ago connected India to the great civilizations which existed in China, Persia, Egypt, and Rome. We also know that throughout India's long past, people from different parts came here, sometimes as traders, sometimes as conquerors, sometimes as migrants in search of new lands and settled down here. In remote Indian villages, often people recall a time when their ancestors lived elsewhere from where they came and settled down where they now live. Global interactions or even a global outlook are thus not novel developments unique to the modern period or unique to modern India. Now let us discuss next point, colonism and the global connection. We begin our story of social and economic development in modern India from the colonial period. We will recall from chapter 1 that the modern capitalism had a global dimension from its very inception. Colonism was part of the system that required new sources of capital, raw materials, energy, markets, and a global network that sustained it. Often, globalization today identifies large-scale movement of people or migration as a defining feature. You know, however, that perhaps the greatest movement of people were the migration of European people who settled down in the Americas and Australia. You will remember how indentured labor were taken away in ships from India to work in distant parts of Asia, Africa, and Americas. And the slave trade that carted thousands of Africans away to distant shores. Now let us discuss the next point, independent India and the world. Independent India retained a global outlook. In many senses, this was inherited from the Indian nationalist movement. Commitment to liberalization struggles throughout the world. Solidarity with people from different parts of the world was much part of this vision. Many Indians traveled overseas for education and work. Migration was an ongoing process. Export and import of raw material, goods, and technology was very much part of the development since independence. Foreign firms did operate in India, so we need to ask ourselves whether the current process of change is radically different from anything we have seen in the past. Now let us move to the next point, understanding globalization. We have seen that India had significant links with the global world from very early times. We are also aware that the Western capitalism, as it emerged in Europe, was both built upon and maintained by global control over resources of other countries, as in colonism. The important question is, however, whether globalization is just about global interconnections, or is it about some significant changes in the capitalist system of production and communication, organization of labor and capital, technological innovations and cultural experiences, ways of governance and social movements? These changes are significant even if some of the patterns were already evident in the early stages of capitalism. Some of the changes, such as those following from the communication revolution, have in a myriad ways transformed the way we work and live. We seek to spell out some of the distinctive features of globalization below. As you go through them, you will realize why a simple definition of global interconnection does not capture the intensity and complexity of globalization. Globalization refers to the growing interdependence between different peoples, religions, and countries in the world as social and economic relationships come to stretch worldwide. Although economic forces are an integral part of globalization, it would be wrong to suggest that they alone produce it. It has been driven forward above all by the development of information and communication technologies that have intensified the speed and scope of interaction between people all over the world. Moreover, as we shall see, there was a political context within which it grew. Let us look at the different dimensions of globalization. To facilitate our discussion, we deal with the economic, political, and cultural aspects separately. However, you will soon realize how closely connected and interconnected they are. Now, the next topic is the different dimensions of globalization. The first one is the economic. In India, we often use the terms liberalization and globalization. They are indeed related, but are not the same. In India, we have seen how the state decided to bring some changes in its economic policy in 1991. These changes are termed as liberalization policies. The first one is the economic policy of liberalization. Globalization involves a stretching of social and economic relationships throughout the world. This stretching is pushed by certain economic policies. Very broadly, this process in India is termed liberalization. The term liberalization refers to a range of policy decisions that the Indian state took since 1991 to open up the Indian economy to the world market. This marked a break with an earlier stated policy of the government to have a greater control over the economy. The state after independence had put in place a large number of laws that ensured that the Indian market and Indian indigenous business were protected from competition of the worldwide. The underlying assumption of such a policy was that an erstwhile colonial country would be at a disadvantage in a free market situation. already read about the economic impact of colonism in chapter 1. The state also believed that the market alone would not be able to look after all the welfare of the people, particularly its disadvantaged sections. It felt that the state had an important role to play for the welfare of the people. You will recall from chapter 3 how important the issues of social justice were for the makers of the Indian Constitution. Liberalization of the economy meant the steady removal of the rules that regulated Indian trade and finance regulations. These measures are also described as economic reforms. What are these reforms? Since July 1991, the Indian economy has witnessed a series of reforms in all major sectors of the economy: agriculture, industry, trade, foreign investment and technology, public sector, financial institution, etc. The basic assumption was that greater integration into the global market would be beneficial to Indian economy. The process of liberalization also involved the taking of loans from international institutions such as the International Monetary Fund. These loans are given on certain conditions. The government makes commitments to pursue certain kind of economic measures that involve a policy of structural adjustments. These adjustments usually mean cuts in state expenditure on the social sector, such as health, education, and social security. There is also a greater say by international institutions such as the World Trade Organization. Now, let us wind up the session and thank you very much for engaging yourself with the self learning podcast.